Panel.
Deputy Karen Wilson, member of the panel.
Deputy Max Andrews, a member of the panel.
Deputy Southern gives his apologies today. Okay.
I'm Ian Gorse, Minister for External Relations, and I'm joined online by one of my assistant ministers.
It's Deputy Lynn Miller.
And I'm joined by officials from both financial services, financial crime and external relations, so they can introduce themselves perhaps from...
Kate Nutt, Chief Officer External Relations.
Tom Lefevre, Director of External Relations.
George Pemane, Director of Financial Crime Strategy.
And Helen Delacour, Director of Financial Services.
Thank you. And we thanks again for to the Treasury Minister here in I guess in an external relations capacity as well for joining us online. We appreciate that. Just to draw your attention, you've done these many times before. It doesn't really need saying, but just for the record, there's a statement in front of you which I think you understand. So you're able to speak freely here, so long as what you say is you believe to be true, and we'll continue. So we know that today's been a big day for you all, and we know that you've had a big presentation this morning. We'll get onto that in due course. The first matter I do want to talk about, though, is questions around double taxation, which did come up in the States recently. So could you talk us through the process for forming double taxation agreements? For example, what the time frame for these is on average, and maybe how it is decided which double tax agreements we enter into, how and when.
Thanks. That was just an official that should have been joining us, but has now got pulled into something else. So, as you and FATCA, although they're still in place, I suppose it's a two-pronged position with regard to double taxation agreements. One is where we might be engaging in business, and the other is round people-to-people exchanges. The thing I should say is that in order to sign any international agreement like this, you need to have two willing parties. And I think it's fair to say that we perhaps don't have as many double taxation agreements as some either sovereign states or even some sub-sovereign states, because of the way that our business taxation has been structured historically. We signed them, of course, under entrustment from the United Kingdom, because we're sovereign, so we can only enter into them once the UK has used a model of entrustment saying, yes, you can go away and negotiate. They are negotiated, though, by ourselves and the other party to the agreements. How long do they take to negotiate? Really, how long is a piece of string? Some can be done really quickly, and I'll just ask Tom to talk about that, the technical detail of it. Others can take years, and they can take, even though they potentially are relatively straightforward to negotiate, once the two parties have negotiated, you've still got the domestic parliamentary or ministerial processes in country, and that can take in some cases years. But Tom, do you want to add a little bit more about the practicalities?
Yeah, very happy to. Jersey typically negotiates along the lines of the OECD model convention, but there are other models out there. So where we have two partners that both their treaties largely based on the OECD model convention, then that tends to be a quicker negotiation because there's greater similarity between the two sides' initial texts. As I say, there are other models, though. There's a UN model convention. Developing countries tend to be, quite focused on that UN model convention. There are also regional ones. Africa has a number of regional blocks that they have particular models. And so the greater the variance at the outset, then logically the longer the negotiation can take. Then it's also the case, as the Minister has said, it's not uncommon for some jurisdictions to take quite some time between the technical business of the officials having negotiated the provisions of the treaty and the presentation of that treaty, legal review and the ratification. In some jurisdictions, ratification can take a good long time. Jersey typically has not been one of those jurisdictions. We've been reasonably swift at that, and I I would say that I think that's an advantage of our system. Treaty partners know that when we negotiate with them, they can look online and see that we proceed with ratification reasonably swiftly. Just on the how do we pick them, as the Minister said, not everybody wants a double taxation agreement network, although I think there has been a trend towards it, and not everybody wants one with us. So we can't sort of absolutely pick anywhere. It has to be with partners who want to talk to us. I think we've done a good job of trying to focus on partners where we think that's possible. In that, we've been guided by things like the McKinsey review. So you will have seen that in recent years, we've moved beyond Europe, and we've really been focusing on Middle East and Africa in line with the recommendations of that report for the development of growth markets for our financial services industry. It's also the case that we try and maintain a little bit of flexibility, because in some cases you might find a jurisdiction that approaches us a little bit out of the blue, or an opportunity arises. We always want to be able to try and be agile and responsive and to seize that opportunity if we find the momentum.
Great. Can I ask, is the imperative usually from a business perspective or personal taxation perspective, or do elements of both feature in the desire for double taxation?
It's both.
Yeah.
And it has to be both for the reasons that we've just explained. I think you asked me a question in the States recently about Portugal. That again, there would be great benefit there to Portuguese citizens living here in Jersey, of which we know there is a substantial number, and some islanders living in Portugal. But that is one of those cases where you've got to have two willing parties. We have made the case quite clearly on a number of occasions that we would be desirous of entering into a DTA. That at this point is not being reciprocated from Lisbon.
Do you know why?
Well, it comes back down to that. We're only a small place. They are more used to dealing with larger countries. And so, although we sometimes look at large states and think, oh, well, they've got ample capacity to do everything, they also are resource constrained, and they will be, like we want to enter into treaties with larger partners and bigger countries. Even states like Portugal will take the same view.
Yeah. Can I ask what role the consuls might play in those, especially when it's feeding back from what we might call diaspora communities, and thinking of other communities, not just the Portuguese in Jersey, but there are.
Well, I think it's a good question, and I think that one of the roles that the consuls can play in regard to this, and I had a conversation with a member of the public today about a slightly different issue, but involving the honorary consul. They can be also useful in lobbying on behalf of their citizens who are living in Jersey, whether that be getting a visa into Schengen and all of the requirements there, or whether it be negotiating, encouraging the negotiation of a double taxation agreement, or negotiating an agreement around driving licences, for example. So we try to use all of those levers that we've got.
Thank you. And it'll be the last question from me on this part, but are there any double taxation agreements being progressed that you can tell us about at the moment?
Tom Will.
Yep, so we'll have two that will be coming to the States Assembly shortly. I think as a panel, I think you've been notified through the department, but just for the purpose of this hearing, that's an amendment to our double taxation agreement with Mauritius, and it's an amendment to our double taxation agreement with Ireland. Both of those are what we call BEPS amendments. That stands for base erosion and profit shifting. There's a big initiative at the OECD to make sure that treaties are adapted to comply with those standards. That requires a bilateral negotiation, and we've done that with those two partners. I'm hopeful that we'll also, in coming months, be able to present some full double taxation agreements to the Assembly. I probably won't say too more on that now, because it's subject to the intergovernmental discussion. It depends on the other treaty partner, but suffice it to say, we've had some really positive negotiations where we've achieved good outcomes, and we're getting towards that final stage of doing the legal review and being able to present them. So hopefully more to come, which is a positive for our perspective.
Thank you. Appreciate the answers. Are there any questions from the panel?
Yes, one from me, Chair. I just want to ask you, Minister, what are the benefits of, say, having a double taxation agreement for, say, a state's citizens, and what may be the consequence of not having one as well?
Well, they're all about ensuring that income and payments don't get taxed twice, as the name suggests, quite simply. And so the benefit is that you can reach agreement with another country on how you're going to treat income arising from one or the other country. It's about avoiding paying tax here in Jersey, and if we're in the Portuguese situation, in Portugal as well. And that's on all sorts of income. So it could be dividends, royalty, income, general employment income.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Yeah, presumably the downside then is not that there's a reputational damage for the citizens are inconvenienced and businesses are inconvenienced.
Yeah, the downside is that you have an added cost of living in one place or potentially the other place. Tom, did you want to?
To absolutely support everything the Minister said there. The other aspect can be that what you hope to achieve, you don't always achieve it, but what you can achieve is that you get a preferential rate in a treaty. And so you have a situation there where someone who would be a Jersey resident or indeed a Jersey company would be able to access the lower rate of taxation that's contained within the bilateral treaty, as opposed to the general rate of taxation on what they call withholding taxes, which are those that, as the Minister says, apply across border. So generally speaking, we want to be in a position where living and working and doing your business in Jersey is the best place to do that. And if we have a competitive treaty network with good rates, then that helps that. The other aspect, of course, is you get more certainty around a treaty rate. So the international treaty takes precedence over the local changes, and that means if you're a business or an individual making long-term decisions, if you've got a treaty in place, you have a better chance that that is the rate that you will pay, as opposed to being subject to ongoing changes at the domestic level.
Yeah, that was my question, which is around, was there any advantages
Okay, sorry
around the preferential? No, that's okay.
And you've got the
Minister, when did you become aware of the Moneyval results, and what was your initial impression upon hearing the results?
well, of course, being part of the government minister responsible, I get to see the report, and I'm involved in the process all the way through. So I've been involved in the process for a great number of years now. I also see the first cut, as it were, when the assessment team have left. So they left back in November, George, was it?
October.
October, so they were here for 2 weeks. They gave us their initial brief report then, and then they worked on that, and I, as the minister responsible, was able to see those reports, but of course couldn't say anything to anyone about it. The thing I suppose I should say is it is a process. The assessors come, they do all of their interviews, they, well, before that, of course, they have lots and lots of documentation that we send over to them, and questionnaires. They ask for more documentation, and then they use all of that documentation as a basis for their on-site visit. So we have a feel for how things are going as we go through this process. We see areas where perhaps the assessment team we don't think have fully understood. We make a case one way or the other. So I personally, as Minister responsible, have known for some time, George will remind me exactly when it was that I got the first cut. November, of where we might be landing in the report that's published today.
And as you mentioned, Minister, there is a series of dialogue between the government and the assessment team if there are any concerns that are raised by the government. Now, during that process, did any officials raise concerns with the assessment team where maybe they made a judgment which you happened to challenge?
Oh well, it's a dynamic process. Some of the things in any initial report can be a misunderstanding about a situation. Jersey holds complex structures, and we have complex cross-border flows, so that's not surprising. George will be able to draw on his experience when he's visited other jurisdictions and been on their assessment team where things have been corrected. So it's a dynamic process throughout this period, even down to grammatical errors and punctuation, for example.
Yeah.
So, George, do you want to just
Yes.
talk a little bit about maybe not just
process.
our experience, but the process full stop, if that would be helpful?
So I think that the first thing to mention is it's a technical process and is required by the statute to be technical. So there's obviously the political involvement in oversight and management of the process. The technical process is carried out by officials only. So whenever you're doing an evaluation, either in our evaluation or when I'm evaluating another country, I'll be speaking to an equivalent official in a foreign government or someone from a financial intelligence unit or a supervisor. There will be an element of briefing to the political leaders, which is absolutely normal. And there will be an element of discussing and strategy at a political level, but the actual engagement is there. Now, there's obviously, with a report that at the end of it is 400 pages long, there's a huge amount of stuff that you have to work through. Some of it may be genuine disagreement with the assessment team, where you hold different views to them on the effectiveness of the regime. That's worked out through multiple meetings in the process, and usually where you end up is a compromise position, or you may reach the end of the process and not agree with the conclusion of the assessment team, and there are a few very limited areas where that's the case. Most of it, though, in reality is actually an understanding conversation, in that they may have written something by misunderstanding your situation, and that's just a process of iteration with them to make sure that the report is as accurate as possible. For us, we commend the assessment team thoroughly in trying to reach really the same goal the country wants, is an accurate report which is factually correct. And you might not always agree on the opinion, but that's just the way that these work. Yeah. So yes, that probably gives you a bit of an outline of the political v official engagement.
Can I just ask, so that process you're talking about, does that happen between October and May, effectively October and now?
Exactly that. Yeah. It's
So
very
that's
structured.
it's not set in stone in October, but you know globally the headlines and the...
You broadly know where you're going, and the ratings may be given as they may not be firm. They can move, and they do move. So it's a process really that you go through between them. But the parts of the process is heavily set in stone by the way the money val procedures work. So you have a very set number of days to comment at each time. Right. And the same applies to the assessment team as for us. And it's the money val secretariat who sit in the middle who have to apply that fairly across all reports. It's a bit like how we play any game, a game of tennis or a game of football. The rules have to be adhered to make sure it's fair.
And apart from you, apart from government, are there any other bodies representing the industry, for example, that would intervene in that process?
So not the industry. The requirement of the statute is that it has to be kept to only official levels. So that's authority, public sector level.
The regulator? And
the regulator. So our agencies are involved in that conversation, and they're all part of our money val preparation group, as we explained in the briefing. They have been involved throughout, and that is very much a consultation. So if it's an area which is particularly around supervision, they will lead on that answer. We will all discuss it, and there will be an element to make sure we are approaching this consistently, but as it's their specialist area, that's the way they represent themselves.
And have you been able to change any of the ratings substantively in that period due to disagree?
So I can't talk about any of the process before publication, unfortunately, because that's part of the confidentiality side of it. But I think what can be said is there is always a degree of movement from when you start drafting a report to the end. Okay. And it's that even happens, as we said this morning, right up until all the countries in the Moneyval membership are commenting and debating in the plenary in Strasbourg. And things can move at the last minute, and indeed regularly do.
Okay.
I mean, you will say you can go to the plenary with a report that the assessment team is happy with, that the Secretariat is happy with, but you can still have member states arguing for a different result on a particular evaluation, and that can be won or lost by how you argue your case on the floor of the plenary right at the end.
Does that mean that you have to supply additional evidence in order to make your case around that? So it's almost, as you say, it's an iterative process until you get to that final point.
Absolutely. So we strengthen our argument as we go through, and that will involve an element of us presenting our best arguments, and then it's decided by consensus. So it's actually just whether the room is broadly in agreement with the position of the assessment team. it would have to be the other way round and take at least 3 countries to block something being adopted as a change. So yes, it's further refining and putting forward your arguments, really.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, could you just outline what the specific results are for Jersey's radar assessment?
The key findings, I think.
The answer, of course, is no, I can't, because it's not quite that straightforward. So we are, my overall analysis of the report is that it is a good report. But fighting financial crime is best described as a journey. It's never complete. One always has to be on what we use simplistic terms on one's guard, because those who are seeking to financially benefit from crime are changing their methodology of using centres like Jersey as they are to use centres around the globe. And George and the professionals talk about typologies and trying to think about, okay, so this is how they've done it in the past, this could be, in this case, this. So we can never be complacent about it. The important thing is that we are committed to upholding international standards. So the review is broken down into the technical compliance, which is technical compliance with the 40 FATF recommendations, and then it's broken down into how well you are effectively, your technical compliance, is it effective at fighting financial crime? And if you take those results overall, they are good, but we would expect them to be recommendations for improvement and changes that are necessary, and we saw that as well in this report.
Do you believe Jersey's exceeded expectations?
I don't think that's how we can approach these evaluations. We remind ourselves that at the end of financial crime are individuals. This idea that you could have white-collar crime and it was a victimless crime is actually an idea for the birds. Something like between 80 and 90%, George will correct me, of all crime committed around the globe is to gain financial benefit. And if we look at that statistic, we see that real people are impacted and hurt, and their lives are torn apart by in pursuing crime which would give financial benefit to another. You take human trafficking. Human trafficking, we always think it's about the people being trafficked, and of course they're the ones at the really tough end, but it's about money. It's about people further up the pyramid seeking to make money. When they've got that money, what are they going to do with it? They want to get it into the financial system. That's why our protections are so important. That's why a good report is important, but it's also a learning process. We can learn from what the assessors are saying about our processes and our systems.
And would you say that the messaging was quite clear for people to understand about the importance of protecting citizens from some of the things that you've just mentioned, or would you say there was maybe more emphasis on the regulation aspect?
Well, that also is a good question, Deputy. They're talking to, we've had, George invited some international experts over today for the launch of the report, and one of them was reminding everybody at the launch, but I had a conversation with them afterwards as well, that to some extent that was the basis of why FATF was founded, to ensure that banks were on the right side of the fence and to ensure that we removed banking secrecy. We've never had banking secrecy in Jersey, of course, but also reminding ourselves that at its heart this is about individuals and the effect of crime on individuals. Perhaps that's left the narrative, and we need to regain that narrative, because that's actually what this is all about. It's not about whether a supervisor's ticked a box or somebody in Hill Street has got a paper copy of a driving licence, for example. It is about making sure we can defend ourselves as much as is possible, because it's an evolving landscape, as much as is possible at this point in time, to ensure that we're not used by bad actors.
Can we just look at some of the individual areas for improvement? So let's not gloss over the fact that Jersey, of course, got a good initial ranking for risk, which we know is one of only 3 jurisdictions. There are, if I look specifically at immediate outcomes 3, 4, 6 and 7, so that the first 2 deal with supervision, preventative measures, then financial intelligence, money laundering, investigation and prosecution. These were areas which, should we say, only scored moderately, so that are areas for perhaps some significant improvements. Could you talk to us about those, please?
Yeah, so your question is a fair question. They are areas for significant improvement. We've got plans in place, and those agencies that are directly involved have got plans in place. But it goes to underline how difficult actually it is in some of these particular areas to fight crime. But George, you will talk about those 4 particular moderates.
So I think the first thing to say is that the moderates in EIA 3 and 4 were expected. That is because that's been the global direction of travel for some time. It was outlined again this morning in the public event that most countries around the world have only achieved moderate ratings, and the question was quite rightly posed, does that mean that the approach to trying to supervise the sector globally is not working? And to some extent, that is a conclusion that's being drawn. The FATF, the standard setter, is kind of searching as to what it's looking for. So we expected the rating. I think there are only 4 jurisdictions in the world who have a substantial rating. But there are still important recommendations in that area that we need to address, and they are ones we've known about. They've been included as a priority in the Ministerial Priorities and High-Level Action Plan that's published today. A lot of the things around the approach to supervision and the approach to enforcement will be impacted by the strategic review of the regulatory environment, which the Minister may want to speak to in a second. I'll move to EIA 6 and 7, which is a bit more of a simpler answer and I guess a less political answer. In those areas, the report broadly confirms that we are on the right track in terms of the work we're already doing, but more needs to be done. The FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, as you know, has been subject to legislative change, structural change and investment over a number of years. We need to do more of that, and we need to go further. It's only in its current stages of just separating from being an arm of the States of Jersey Police. It is now an independent function in law. It will become more independent as we go into next year, as it takes on its own premises and ends up using more of its own kind of technology around analysis of intelligence, its work around disseminating intelligence and working with the industry on building a greater intelligence body. The report basically endorses that approach in whole, and that's something that's been in the ministerial strategy for some time, and there is continued focus on trying to obtain the funding the FIU needs in government plan processes. For investigations and prosecutions, the story is similar but slightly different. I think the reason I'd say it's slightly different is that the world is struggling to get well-qualified investigators and prosecutors. It is a difficult area. Forensic accountants, who are often used in this, they're very difficult to find to bring in for cases. And these cases that we deal with in Jersey are really very large. They go across multiple jurisdictions. They can often involve many hundreds of thousands of boxes of files if they were physically produced to examine. And that requires both the use of human resource and technology to analyse. The report basically says that we have the capability to do all of that. We just need to do more to get the cases to the stage of prosecution, which of course is a decision for the Attorney General to take. So it says there's no fundamental deficiencies, nothing is missing. Do more, and you should see results in due course. But the report is also very clear that we haven't yet seen the results that's expected on the risk profile. So that is something that the government and the island are very cognizant of, and we will watch and wait for, and at an appropriate level, which is a kind of strategic monitoring level, because we've got to remember that, particularly with prosecution, that's an independent function exercised independently. It's a prosecution authority. We will keep monitoring that those resources are there to bring us to that stage of prosecution and make sure that those cases come through.
Okay, so if I could just drill down, Minister, on a couple of those areas. I think the first thing is to just get your view on what the consequences of the assessment are for the financial services industry itself.
Well, I think it's a positive one. I think it reinforces the message that Jersey is committed to international standards and complying with international standards, and that there are no fundamental deficiencies. But it equally picks up on these areas where we need to make changes. We need to ensure that there is appropriate resource, and that we need to ensure that we are managing and mitigating risk in an appropriate way. So yes, it's positive. We just need to be clear that if we were sitting here today and the assessors were saying, I recognise that it's a journey, and we recognise that we, like all financial centres, and FATF itself needs to think, is it really dealing with the risks in the system, and is it making improvements, and is it at its basic level, are its processes and assessments stopping people's or criminals accessing the financial system?
So on the issue of the impact of increased supervision on the industry, what's your assessment of that, given what you've just said?
Well, it's supervision is about ensuring that industry is dealing with the risks that come with the business that it's undertaking, and the supervisor is regulating to make sure it's got processes and procedures in place to understand the risk of the business that any given institution is managing. So if we come to IO1 at a national level, that says that we do understand that risk, and that understanding is across industry, and that we're coordinated in how we are approaching that risk. But does it say we should think about, in effect, the supervisory and regulatory environment? Then yes, it does, which is why, as George said, we've got these action plan in place, and one of those actions which deals with the idea of supervision is a regulatory environment review. But rather than pointing fingers, what that needs to do and what that will do is look at the legislative base. It will look at how we are regulating. So are we suitably regulating in a risk-based approach? Is it having the outcomes that we want? So is it flowing where bad action is taking place or Jersey is being used inappropriately? Is that flowing through the system? Are people being sanctioned? Are people being prosecuted? And so we'll do this review, which will look at what's happening internationally. It will engage with stakeholders, some of whom have got ideas and questions about how we are currently supervising and regulating. Report picks up on some of that.
Okay.
How we're using technology, how we're getting rid of duplication. For example, if somebody brings a piece of business to Jersey, we currently require them to provide CDD, so their customer knowledge stuff, to all of the service providers, even though they might all be based in Jersey. Now, we can all see that's not taking a risk-based approach. What is important is that everybody in that chain understands who it is that's doing the business, what the reason for the business is, where the funds are coming from and where the funds are going to. And so we've got to get back to where is the risk, and then how are we dealing with that risk and how are we mitigating that risk, and not as is probably the situation more globally. If we look at the moderate rating across the globe is looking at, okay, well, have you ticked this box and you've got this documentation?
Can I just want to make a point on what the report says on supervision, so I just want to be clear. So it says that the GFSE should either make use of more full scope examinations or thematic inspections or off-site monitoring tools. So what it gives there is a number of options to increase the way in which they supervise. It does not suggest that across the board the amount of supervision should increase. It gives them a number of options to reconsider their supervisory approach. So we wouldn't want it to be thought that this is automatically going to mean that firms will be seeing more supervisors more regularly. One of the conversations we have with them a lot is how they could use technology to actually target their supervision in a more risk-based manner, and that's something that they're actively considering and something that is an evolving picture worldwide. So it's not going to mean that there will be an increase in supervisors. Indeed, increasing the number of people employed by the supervisor would be problematic because that would increase the cost base as well. So these are all things that have to be taken into consideration.
And is this something that will be form part of your strategic review that you're talking about, so people will be able to see the detail of what's involved in that? Yeah. You mentioned earlier on that it's going to be forthcoming, but have you got any indication of when people would be likely to see that?
Well, Helen, you might want to talk about timing. We will be starting it in the second half of the year. We'll want to engage experts to look at the international environment, and we'll probably want to engage local firms to think about the local aspects of it, or the Jersey-centric aspects of it. It is going to take some time because it's got to be done in partnership. There's got to be full consultation, and we think probably we'll have something towards the middle of next year. But that doesn't mean to say that we won't be able to take action in some areas or make some changes as we go along the way, as we build a consensus about changes that could improve.
Yeah, as the Minister says, it's a significant project to look at this holistically to make sure we get the framework right that continues to meet the international standards but enables that ease of doing business that we may have lost a little bit along the way. We've formed a group, or we will be forming very shortly, a group entirely focused at competitiveness. So we're tackling some of those early challenges that we can take on now that don't have the same cost and resource implication. So we'll deal with those first. And then the bigger challenges will wait for the output of the review.
Okay, so over the next 12 months, we can at least start to see some output from the work.
And engagement, you'll see the engagement start to happen to make sure that we're looking at the right things.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the capability of the Financial Intelligence Unit, we heard that it's been increasing over the last 12 months, 2 years. How does this actually impact the Moneyval assessment?
Let me take that.
Yeah.
So, excuse me, frog in my throat. Quite significantly, financial intelligence is kind of at the core of everything that sits in the upper immediate outcomes. The FIU, during the evaluation process, were probably involved in the most meetings of any of the bodies. So your capability to build and use financial intelligence effectively is really significant. We'd identified that for a few years, which is why we started taking action back in 2020 to move their structure and resources. So it really is quite a significant factor to everything that we're doing. We're in a good place with the FIU now. There is a new director, well, not new now, he's been here over 16 months or so, with significant international intelligence experience. He is changing the approach from what was an operational law enforcement investigative unit really to an intelligence body. That will still require further training and resources domestically to bring other staff up to that level, and we're currently at the stage of investing in specialist technology to allow them to do financial analysis across specific areas. There's also the need to build a different relationship or an ongoing relationship with the industry. There's this phenomenon known as public-private partnerships, or PPPs, where broadly the view is that if you can build a different relationship with particularly the financial services industry, the sharing of intelligence will allow you to do much more prevention, and it's kind of the view that prevention is better than cure. So if you can actually understand more at the beginning around where the risks are on a kind of public-private basis, that should prevent things coming to the stage where actually you're seeing things come through the door that may be of criminal intent. So those are all areas. Apologies.
Yeah, no, so thank you for that, George. Are you likely, as a result, to see more criminal prosecutions coming forward?
It's difficult to say. I think as was said this morning in the panel, we don't consider it as an issue in identifying where criminality is. The factors that sit behind whether a prosecution is brought or not are varied and many. I think what we will see is an increasing ability to identify whether or not that results in prosecutions being brought here or elsewhere, because it doesn't necessarily matter if a prosecution is not brought in Jersey. If our information is passed to a foreign authority and action is taken there, ultimately that has resulted in something that's positive for the global fight against financial crime. I think we will see ability for us to demonstrate how our work is cracking down on more financial crime, and I do think that probably will lead to an increase in prosecutions, but the only person who will be able to tell you that authoritatively is the Attorney General.
And as he reminded the audience today, he still has the two tests.
Yeah. Can I ask about the number of prosecutions? At the briefing, there were two prosecutions were given as an example, but are they the only two that have happened recently, or are there?
So in the report, the prosecutions that are referred to there are the ones which have come to a conclusion. So those are the ones that have happened inside the reporting period. Yeah. The report's not able to speak about anything that's ongoing, and we can't speak about that here.
And that reporting period was, remind us, 5 years?
5 years, yeah, correct. The ones that were given as examples are good ones, but they predominantly relate to what we would call kind of local financial crime. One is the kind of organised crime gang coming in and buying a number of high-value things, which was quite easily looked at, and the other ones that were talked about, I think, was the if I'm correct, the drug and laundering through a local jeweller was the other one that's talked about.
So neither, to be fair, neither of those are to do with the finance industry, are they?
They're not, and that is what the assessors say. They say that where we'd be expecting to see more, where the finance industry is used as an intermediary. Now, what they were able to see is that there was plenty of work going on around the investigation of those cases, but they had not yet reached that stage of a decision for prosecution. So there are plenty of those cases in the field of investigation. They've just not reached that point. So it's almost the way we're describing it as a point-in-time assessment. In due course, it would be expected. So when Moneyval come back, if the situation in 2029 and 2030 is the same, and there is still nothing that involves the finance industry, I think we will be having a very difficult story to say. But that is not the expectation, nor was the expectation of the assessment team.
Just on that, finally, from me, as a result of the assessment, will there be any changes to the investigation processes that will be put in place?
Can I answer?
Yes,
So the high-level action plan addresses a number of areas of changes which have already been agreed between the government and the Attorney General, because of course, again, the unit is independent inside his office. Those changes were around, I guess, developing the structure to be more effective and looking to be more of an investigative unit rather than a subgroup of lawyers inside a prosecutorial department. And there is the intention to bring forward new legislative powers to allow the ECU specific powers for investigation, which previously they got from the secondment of police officers into the ECU. So there will be, in the next 12 months, I would imagine 12 to probably, but at least by the end of next year, in front of the panel will be legislation in that area, which will be worked on collaboratively with the Attorney General.
Thank you.
Can I go back to one of the points about the, I guess it's about supervision and preventative measures. Did the report identify, or are you more generally aware of any products or services or even companies that carry higher inherent risk in their business?
You want me to carry on, because that really comes through the national risk assessment.
The Minister's correct. So the report identifies that the national risk assessment identifies areas where the risk is higher. And the good news is the report endorses that risk assessment, saying that it is a reasonable set of conclusions. And we refreshed those risk assessments just before the on-site last year. So there are a number of areas. I direct the panel to the September-October 2023 money laundering risk update. And there are a number of areas pointed out in there which are at the higher risk. But broadly, when you look at it on a sectoral basis, you still have a grouping of banks and TCSPs that are up in the higher area. I'm using my hand just to gesture to show what's a heat map that we kind of use. And then near there is also the funds sector with lawyers slightly further below. There's also now identified kind of risks around other areas like virtual assets, but we know from the risk assessment and our specific risk assessment that our virtual asset service provider community in Jersey is very small, 5 operators at the time of doing it, and most of them are not doing, for example, wholesale virtual currency exchange, which is an area which is higher risk. So yes, the report identifies it, but it adopts the islands approach.
So when you talk about virtual assets, are you talking about cryptocurrencies there?
So correct, cryptocurrency. The FATF developed a definition of virtual assets which is broader than just cryptocurrency, for example. It includes things like initial coin offerings, so people who create different types of coins, for example. NFTs would be in there, for example, so non-fungible tokens, and a whole variety of other things which are technically described in the law, but I wouldn't be able to describe to you in person because that's not my thing. So yeah, virtual assets is a broader definition than just crypto, but all of those can be used effectively as a representation of money and therefore can be used as a way to conduct money laundering.
Sorry, I did say there was a final question, or it was finally, but there is a final. You mentioned earlier about the adoption of technologies in terms of helping the industry through this. What kind of appetite do people have to adapt and actually embrace the technology in support of this?
You want to start? Or do you want to jump in?
Generally speaking, I think people are very eager to adopt technology, but the reticence comes from them needing comfort that the regulator is going to be happy with the technology that they adopt, that it's carrying out the function that they can both agree it's carrying out, because for all the reasons that we know. We've done, George, in your previous guys, before you came back from FATF, you did some work thinking about digital IDs for Jersey, and we've just picked that up again, and that's in our work plan. So it's technology in institutions, but it's also technology enablement within the regulator. So we know that we'll be making changes to the register. We'll be giving access to obliged entities. That will be a technological link for people to have access to information. We know will be that will also move forward for legitimate interest as well. But we're working on that from a European standard perspective. But there's all sorts of things that technology could help with. If we go down the esplanade, we see some of our big banks are already using technology and AI to look at trends across their customer base, and that is all looking at those trends, gathering that information, helps them think about the risks and see risks and patterns that they might not have seen when everything was just paper-based. But Helen can
I
talk
just
more about that.
entirely endorse what you've said on the comfort that the industry are looking for around the technology that they do adapt. We made an amendment to the money laundering order, I think, was it last year, around the use of electronic CDD to say you can do this, but we haven't gone so far as to endorse a particular company or provider, and I expect that's what industry are looking for, that comfort to know that whatever they engage with will be suitable for the regulator.
And as part of your strategic review, Minister, would that be something that you would address?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning on the technology side that some of the ways we collect data is still quite cumbersome. So, for example, all the data we use in risk assessments is still submitted through effectively Excel documents or data sheets with some schemas, but there are better ways to do this now. The slight difficulty we get with this is, and this happened when we looked at this previously, is it's good to use technology and try to ease things, but everyone in industry will have a slightly different view of which technology or how things should be used. So for governments, it's tough for them to be technology neutral, but technology enabling. And that tends to be a bit of a difficulty for governments to get through, because they want to be open, but then you'll have a very large stakeholder, for example, a large bank, that says, well, we just won't do it that way because we've invested huge amounts of money in this route. So it's a difficult set of decisions, but it's something that I think we need to be more forward-thinking on. And we are seeing other countries who certainly are more forward-thinking than us, and it's something the review allows for it to be looked at.
Yeah, and some of those large institutions just adopt the technology from their home country
Yeah.
as well. So we need to be able to factor that into our thinking and give that some form of accreditation as well.
Okay, thank you.
I think we'll move on to talk about JFSC.
Okay, so Minister, can you briefly outline the purpose of the Jersey Financial Services Commission and your interactions with it as Minister?
Well, it's governed by the law, the Financial Services Commission, Jersey Law 1998. You see there that law's been in place a long time, and that's another reason why I've announced the strategic review of the regulatory environment. It's responsible for the supervision and development of financial services provided in or from within Jersey.
Okay, can you just explain for the public, benefit of the public, what role it plays in cultivating business in the island?
Well, the regulator is a risk-based regulator. Within the MOU between government and Jersey, there is a clause in there that it should be regulating for jobs and growth. And this is one of the areas that we'll pick up in the strategic review. Do we have a regulatory environment that is facilitating growth and innovation? As I have said, and as we all know, so we're contacted by various stakeholders across the island, there is a view in some quarters that we are not getting that right, and this is why we need to do that review.
And does that follow that it has a role to play in, cultivating the reputation of the island in relation to its activities?
Well, it's fundamental to ensuring that we meet international standards, as we've just seen in the publication of the mutual evaluation report. They're also, of course, responsible for the company's registry. That registry has remained relatively flat, with 30,000 registered companies on there. There is a question for us to ask as an island. Should we be seeking to see a registration of companies in Jersey growing? And I think the answer to that question is yes. But within this framework that we're developing about fighting financial crime. So I think there are other areas that we can all point to that says, yes, the base is following the international standard. Within that approach to the international standard and showing that we can comply with it, how do we grow our finance industry? And they have an important part in doing that, just as we do in government in reviewing our legislation and making amendments where appropriate. Ease of doing business.
The general value and productivity of the finance industry, and as to whether it's increased or which direction it's going in.
Well, we know that over the recent past, due to low interest rates, the technical productivity, which is employees per GVA, has declined, because we know that the profitability has declined because we've had low interest rates. Ironically, in a time of high interest rates, causes difficulty for islanders with a cost of living crisis, but it makes the finance industry much more profitable. So we'll see that productivity level increase. We've made those cases. When we had low interest rates, people poo-pooed us and said, oh, don't be ridiculous. Now we're going to see that increased productivity. we shouldn't take that really as a proper indication. What we should be thinking about is, how are we driving out duplication? How are we dealing with technology, as you've just been saying, Deputy? But I am absolutely clear. The financial services industry is the bedrock of our economy. The latest business tendency survey shows that they remain optimistic, that they're seeing increased profits. And this is another reason why having a good Moneyval report is fundamental to seeing continued growth in that sector. So the GVA of the finance industry is just around 40%, 42%. George, you might be giving me, I don't know if you've got that slide there, but anyway, but that's direct GVA. Once you add in indirect GVA, it jumps up to around 70%. So it's absolutely fundamental. Have we always made the case for the golden thread between financial services, high standard of living, and the ability for government to provide services based on the income from financial services? I don't think we have. So I think that's a job of work that we need to continue doing, and a case we need to continue making.
So we're mindful, obviously, some of this is in the context of the Pillar 2, which is going to be, we're scrutinising separately, or there's a joint scrutiny panel. So we won't go directly into that today, but insofar as the next question might need to be mindful of that. In terms of the productivity on the one hand of the finance industry, and then the tax yield that government may therefore expect from the finance industry, bearing in mind not all elements of that are taxed directly. What's the link between those two and the anticipated tax yield maybe in terms of the industry if it is more productive?
Well, I'm obviously not going to. We're literally days away from publishing the government plan, which will have a base case scenario for income arising out of Pillar 2, but that is only a base case. There is potential for considerable upside on that, which I've said. That will obviously increase the direct tax from the financial services industry as a proportion of overall taxation that the government receives. Tommy's kindly slipping me a note here.
I mean, we can keep it more.
Yeah.
We can keep it more high level because I'm not necessarily looking for figures, but
No, and I'm not. I wasn't going to give you. Wasn't going to give you numbers.
in the sense, I guess what I'm asking is that there's obviously there are businesses in Jersey which are taxed. There are businesses that aren't taxed.
Yeah.
And for the ones that aren't taxed, for example, the argument's always been that, well, we get the benefit through job creation, and if we can create either lots of jobs or jobs which pay and therefore are taxed and charge social security. But there's also a counter weight, I suppose, around productivity, which is to try and get fewer jobs but at higher value. So there may be productivity that doesn't involve jobs. So ultimately what I'm asking is how does government get the yield if there's increased productivity which isn't necessarily being taxed directly?
Yeah, well, it's as you know, once we've implemented Pillar 2, and we're due to lodge the legislation at some point next week, I think it is, if we're still on that trajectory, that will bring 1,400 existing companies and operators in Jersey who are either currently paying at 10 or not paying any tax at all. So just by a simple compliance with Pillar 2, the OECD approach to taxing those large multinationals, we're going to see an improvement. But whilst that's a good thing, we do also need to focus on, which I think is the core of your question, how do we maintain profitability in financial services and not necessarily grow the number of people employed in those services. And it's what we've been doing over generations, which is ensuring that we've got higher value people either moving here or being maintained here. And we also remind ourselves that is a global competition as well. We're seeing member states seeking to attract higher value people from a financial perspective. I'm making no determination about them as individuals. We're talking about GVA here. Elsewhere across Europe as well. So we are in a global race for that, but we are being, I think, reasonably successful in encouraging funds and hedge funds and individuals involved in those hedge funds to Jersey. We're seeing increased use of Jersey by US funds. That's the point Tom was just reminding me of. And we think that that will continue post Pillar 2 as well. But that's our strategy, to get to the heart of your question.
Okay, but you're talking about 2-1-Es in part of that?
As part of it, yes, but not just that, because the work about funds from the USA and hedge funds coming here and individuals setting their funds up, is the individual might come and bring their fund, but then they ultimately employ others in a high value role as well.
Are you anticipating something similar to Pillar 2 being applied to personal income tax for the likes of 2-1-Es? Is those conversations being had?
Well, so those conversations are ongoing at the UN and at the OECD, but they are in a nascent state. They are still quite theoretical. When Tom and I were in the US, at the spring meetings of the World Bank and IMF, they were just starting to talk about what it might look like, and those conversations of course have gained traction, because it's quite attractive to governments to say, okay, we could take the 3,000 billionaires around the world. So actually you're slightly above, to some extent, not in every case, some of the people that are coming to Jersey, but there are some. You're talking about these 3,000 billionaires. The question is, most of the arguments made about a global tax on the super wealthy are about what you're going to do with the money. Now, okay, you could develop a framework to tax them, although I think it's difficult. What then individual states do with that money is a matter for those individual states. So there's still a way to go on that conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd find something to do with it, wouldn't they? But I think that's not the hardest part.
Well, they would, but the proponents of this model are saying, well, we should be using this money to help the world go carbon neutral, for example.
Right. Thanks for that. And we'll no doubt we'll come back to some of that in a different format with a different panel. Right, I think we're doing fairly well, which makes me wonder whether we're doing it correctly. Going to move on to external relations visits. So I think we've done all the questions. Did I miss you out, Max? I think there was a question 10. Sorry. Let's finish that question. Go on.
Yes, Minister. Following on from an oral question in the States Assembly about the publication of credit lenders and their rates and terms, I was wondering whether any conversations have taken place between yourself and the Consumer Council.
I haven't personally had time to do that yet, but the latest statistics, of course, that we have from around the differential between UK and Jersey mortgage rates, which is still goes back to April. I understand anecdotally that has been reduced further. Is we've seen a contraction of the differential now to, on average, about 0.7. We understand, I think, why there are those differentials. So it's fair to say we know that the banks are committed to offering the lowest rate mortgages that they can within the constraints that they are. But that is a meeting that we still need to organise.
So can I ask, Minister, obviously Islanders are fully aware when there was plenty of news coverage about the rates being higher in Jersey compared to the UK. So what actions did you take to liaise with the banks, to communicate to them and to make them fully aware of the way how you felt about the way how...
Well, firstly, let me be clear. I probably, through engagement with banking institutions for many a year, understand why there might be a differential and how Jersey banks are Jersey banks. They're not banks based in the United Kingdom. We've had the changes around ring fencing. That's made a differential. They buy money on the money markets at a set rate. They have savers as well that they've been giving increased rates to. They have diseconomies of scale as well. So all of these are factored into the mortgage rate that they can offer. My predecessor in this role for financial services is sat there and hasn't said very much so far, but she maybe will talk about the engagement that she had with the banks at the time that this started to become a public issue and the differential widened as we saw interest rates remain higher for longer. Elaine, I don't know if you want to say anything more.
Would you mind just repeating the question, because the sound was slightly off, slightly dodged, slightly went there. I have been trying to listen to it, but the sound was slightly odd when Deputy Andrews asked his question.
Okay, so I will. Do you want me to answer it for you? It was the engagement that you had with the banks around the differential in mortgage rates and passing on when interest rates either went up or down. I know that you met with them and you wrote to them.
I wrote to them, I think, at the start of last year about, it wasn't specifically about the differential between Jersey and the UK, and I think most of them have responded on that to the more recent survey. I spoke to them particularly about how they were dealing with, because interest rates had gone up so quickly, how they were dealing with customers who may be struggling with mortgages. And the response was generally, we are keeping a very close eye on it. At that stage, they were saying they didn't have a big arrears history, and that where they were they were working very cooperatively with customers, because the last thing a bank wants is a bad debt. Enforcement in Jersey is very uncomfortable, very complicated. So I think the banks do work, I think, very sympathetically when if people are struggling, the banks would rather work with them and get them over the hump than end up with having to take over a house or force somebody out of a home. So that was the interaction I had with them. But I think the differential, there are all sorts of reasons for it. It's partly because we are a small island. There are different risks. There are different concentration risks, and there are different legal structures. So they all have different reasons for why there are differential rates between Jersey and the UK.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister.
And I continue to have conversations with the banks in my general meetings with them.
Up to 11.
Yes, thank you. Minister, we understand you've had a busy schedule of overseas visits, and there's a list in front of me here for the benefit of the public to just outline Jersey, welcomed delegates to the annual political summit, British Irish Council summit in the Isle of Man, French ambassador visit to Jersey, D-Day anniversary in Normandy, Deputy Miller going to the Qatar Economic Forum, and then a whole host of meetings with French, Nigerian, Rwandan and Kuwaiti representatives. Can you highlight for us what the purpose of these meetings were?
Well, each one would obviously have a slightly different purpose. Perhaps maybe if we look at what the government's priorities are, they are to continue to increase engagement with our French neighbours, and that's why you'll see the engagements there with, I think since the start of the year, I'll have met the French ambassador on 3 occasions, one of which was an inbound visit, which was very successful. So we are proactively seeking to improve that relationship for all the reasons that hopefully the panel knows and understands. We're also prioritising, again, as you would expect, engagement with the new government in the United Kingdom over the next quarter. I've already had 2 visits to the UK since the new government. and attended events where I've spoken to members of the new government. Was it last week or the week before when I one of those events spoke to the Prime Minister, so that's the second time now I will have spoken to him. Once before he was the Prime Minister in Normandy, but since then I met alongside with my Guernsey counterpart, Tulip Sadiq, the Economic Secretary to the Treasury and the City Minister, and others as well. So we've really got those two important priorities that we're delivering, but we also have our global engagement strategy as well, and so some of the other engagements that you noted there, which were more global, were really based on that. And for some of those, that's about signing treaties. We're in the process of negotiating, or Tom is, a couple of bilateral investment treaties, and we're seeking to negotiate others with states in the Middle East. And of course, until the change of government, one of the priorities of the previous government was a free trade agreement with the GCC, which is, of course, another reason why we would have engaged there.
Okay,
If that
thank you.
gives you a rough
Can I ask a
counter through.
Can I ask a question about Rwanda? Because you had a meeting with Rwandan representatives on the 7th of May. Does the UK's new government's decision to scrap their Rwanda bill have any implications for Jersey? Are there any knock-on effects?
No, it doesn't. I spoke to the High Commissioner of Rwanda at an event, again last week I think it was, in London, and it has no implications at all in that regard. A new MOU was signed arising out of the inbound visit here to Jersey, and officials are continuing to work to that MOU together.
And what's the relationship that Jersey's establishing, and what's the nature of it with Rwanda?
Well, I was going to say it's twofold, but it's more than that. As you know, we've supported them in thinking about the creation of a finance centre in Kigali. That's been going on for a number of years, and we continue to engage at a governmental level, but also at a JFL level in that regard. We engage at a educational level, so there's been exchanges there. We engage at a JOA level. There's been exchanges there, and a long history of engagement and support in that regard. And we engaged at a business level, so we've as one of the bilateral investment treaties that Tom is in the process of negotiating is with them as well.
And do you know if is the relationship that they have with the Democratic Republic of Congo causing any problems to the stability of business in Rwanda? Do you know, in terms of?
Well, I'm not aware that it is slightly outside of my remit, but we know that obviously there's sometimes friction in that relationship.
Okay. Thank you. Max, I think I'll let you ask question 13.
Yes,
You're happy with that?
Yep, thank you, Chair. I know there have been some concerns raised before the general election in the UK if we were to see a UK Labour government, and now we do see a UK Labour government. So, Minister, my question to you is this: what does a UK Labour government mean for the island?
Well, let me be clear. I've not personally raised concerns about a UK Labour government. We in Jersey have worked with Labour governments in the past. We've worked with Conservative governments. We've worked with coalition governments that involve Conservatives and Liberal Democrats. We take the incoming government at their word. We look at their manifesto. There's lots of alignment there in what they're seeking to do in the United Kingdom to deliver economic growth. Really, most of our conversation today has been about economic growth, and for us it's how we can support the UK in their seeking to deliver economic growth. If you look in their manifesto, it's quite clear.
That potentially could be the case, and could that be the message that the UK government is sending to the bailiwicks?
Well, if we look in, as I say, we look in the manifesto is clear that they will seek to work with Crown dependencies and overseas territories, particularly on matters when it comes to transparency. The report that's just been published today, independent peer review assessment, says that the model that we have for holding, managing and exchanging beneficial ownership information is a model which in effect others could follow and is functioning well. The challenge, I suppose, for us is perhaps a political one, is making sure that we engage frequently and appropriately with the new government to ensure that they have an understanding of that. And we want to work with them. We have the information here in Jersey. We want to understand are the things that they think we could work with them more proactively than perhaps we have in the past. But we remind ourselves already UK law enforcement agencies have access to information on our register of beneficial ownership, in some cases in as little as an hour. So it's making sure that there's a joined up approach and that we continue to have that engagement and those conversations. But we also remind ourselves that's not a specific Labour new government thing. There were views held in the previous government.
Minister, before the House of Commons reconstituted, there was a number of politicians who made public statements about Jersey and Guernsey, and they really focused on Jersey's, say, beneficial ownership and the element of transparency. So why do you believe that those concerns were raised before the House of Commons reconstituted, and do you believe this Moneyval assessment that has recently been undertaken will provide clarity for politicians in the UK?
It's not a new thing for members of the United Kingdom Parliament to raise these issues. We seek to, at all times, engage positively and proactively and to fully understand what the concerns are that others might have about our system. Of course, this report helps because it's independently peer reviewed, so it's not just us saying and others saying, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? No, this is independent people who've peer reviewed our system and says that it works well and we've got accurate information on our register which is exchanged with UK law enforcement agencies. But that doesn't mean to say there isn't more that we can do. We're doing the obliged entities, we'll be working through legitimate interest access. What's important for us is to keep engaging and making the case. For some people, it is a simple matter of we believe information should be in the public domain, whether that information is accurate or it's less than accurate, and that's a polite way of putting how some the information which is held on some public registers might be perceived.
Thank you very much, Minister.
I just want to add on the international context. I think it's important to recognise that the UK is pretty limited now as being one of the few countries that is pursuing a fully public register. There are a number of EU member states that have reduced access in line with the EU court judgment. And I think what we're seeing is a more balanced approach across the EU to privacy rights versus access, and that's where this legitimate interest conversation is going.
Yep.
So the UK is in a very unique position, and that was reflected on this morning by one of our experts. Elsewhere in the world, there is no conversation around these public registers. It is not a topic of conversation really anywhere else apart from than the UK at the moment. And there are benefits and negatives to the ways in which you set registers up. One of the points that was made by the Minister and also by our experts, our register is set up in a very different way from the UK's register and for different aims. I think we can achieve those same goals of giving the information to the people who need it in different ways.
But that doesn't mean to say we don't engage. It's critically important that we continue to engage and have the conversations and the dialogue.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, one of the important things to do in respect of your question, Deputy, what does the Labour government mean? What it means for us, it's not just talking about one particular set of issues. It's really important that a new government understands Jersey in the widest sense. And I would also say that, as I think the Minister referenced, prior to the election, we engaged with the now Foreign Secretary, we engaged with the Trade Sec, the Chancellor, the DEFRA Secretary. So we have already, spoken to a lot of the politicians now in those key roles, and that's important to make sure they understand the full picture.
But there's been a big turnover, and this goes to the point that our work is never done. We keep explaining and having conversations and engaging.
If I were being less than serious, I'd say we may never know what a Labour government would do, because it's a hypothetical question in the UK.
But in the same way that we never know what any government elsewhere is going to do.
True. The point is, I don't think we necessarily have a Labour government. But
Say that, Chair.
no, you wouldn't say that. Might cause a diplomatic incident. There is a question, I guess, more generally around where the conversation is going around tax avoidance more generally. So we know that obviously whilst the money val is focused on money laundering and terrorist financing, there are conversations, and this is of course the whole basis for Pillar 2 about the spirit of how government and taxation and products and services that government pays for is funded, is moving. Where do you think that conversation is heading in terms of for centres like ours?
Well, it's again a good question, Jan. I'm not sure if you were driving at this, but the report does talk about tax and tax avoidance and the work that we do around that. And it is something that we need to be more of an emerging theme around this as well. Tom will know in his neck of the woods when it comes to international treaties, they're thinking much more about supporting collection when it comes to taxes. That's another slightly different issue, but it is still an important one. It's perhaps a challenging one for us. But we continue to make the case that we expect the tax to be paid in the country where the money is being generated. We expect the tax to be paid in the country where the money is being invested and complying with the requirements of those countries. We don't add an extra layer of tax other than as our regime currently stands and as our regime will be in compliance with Pillar 2.
Great. Look, I think we've come to time, so I think there might be one or two questions outstanding that, if you're happy for us to send them over as written questions, I think they could probably be dealt with. Some are technical questions about internal processes between our panel and the department, so they don't necessarily need to be on public record anyway. But if I can just ask the panel, have you got any final questions for the Minister or the department? And likewise, do you have any questions for us?
No. If there are any issues with relaying of information with the panel, do let us know, because if there are any, we'd like to resolve them.
I don't think there are. It's just to clarify some of the